I think, okay, we are live. I think we are live.
It says live, yeah.
It say live?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us today at our first webinar series at Testinui. First, just to confirm that everyone can hear me, I would appreciate if someone could write a comment in the live comment panel, such as hello world or where are you from, just to keep sure that you can hear us. Okay. Yes, great. Thank you very much, Juan. Thank you. So welcome and thank you all for joining us today. My name is Claudia and I have been organizing Testinui from the beginning. In case this is your first time participating in a Testinui activity, we are a community in which we promote and share knowledge regarding testing and quality. We have organized 6 annual conferences. We also organize meetup and we have just started to organize webinars. For this first webinar series, we have invited our keynote speaker from past editions, and we will announce more series soon, so keep posted. And just a few comments before starting. If you are interested in presenting a webinar with us, we are happy to announce that we will open a proposal form soon. So please follow us in our social media to keep you updated. And if you have any question or comment about what Melissa will present, please go ahead and write them in the live comment panel located on the left of your screen. We'll review them at the end of Melissa's presentation. And of course, we will upload the webinar on our YouTube channel, as well as the presentation material on our SlideShare account. So, well, let's get started. We are thrilled and excited to have Melissa Eaden today as our first guest. We met in Chicago at the Agile Testing Day US conference, I think like 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And we have been in touch since then. And last year we had the pleasure to have her at Testing conference. It's always great to be in touch with you, Melissa. So welcome. Thanks again for joining us. Please feel free to start. I will mute my mic and turn off my camera. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. And we're just going to just get started here. So, modern testing principles. You might have heard about it. We're going to do a little deep dive into it, and then I'm going to explain some practical things around it. So there's 7 principles, and who and what who came up with them, and how you can help implement them on your teams. So it's okay. There's going to be a lot of information, but hopefully you can go back through this and show that go over the YouTube video again, and then maybe even take it to your team and talk about it after we're done with this presentation. So, okay, I'm excited. Let's start. Hello. Y'all know who I am, hopefully. Melissa Eaden. You can contact me on Twitter at melthetester. You can also contact me via Gmail at melthetester@gmail.com. The QR code is for my blog, testing and stuff. So you check that out, and it has a lot of really good information and pointers to different things. I also work for Unity. Right now, I am a quality coach, quality consultant at Unity. I started a team recently called Quality Elevation. The idea behind the team is to help teams gain insight into their quality and testing needs, and then help them develop those things so that they can elevate the quality on their teams. So we're trying this as an experiment. We're hoping that it will work out, and I'm hoping to write about it or talk about it soon as well. So, but right now, we're going to talk about testing principles. Now, I did not come up with this. One of the things we're going to talk about in a second, this information is not going to be things you can some of it's going to be things you can immediately take back to your teams and work on, but it's not going to fix problems overnight. If you have problems right now with testing or quality or having a quality product, These are going to help you, but just know that what I'm going to present are ideas to have put you on a path to a higher functioning team. You'll have to take steps to get there. And we're going to talk about those steps. But I just want to warn you, this isn't an overnight fix. This isn't an easy fix. This is going to take work, and this takes the whole team to do it. So it's a whole team approach for sure. Now, one of the things that I like to say is that I'm a disclaimer. This is modern testing principles are not my creation. I work very closely with Alan Page, and Alan Page and Brent Jensen came up with these. I've written an article about them myself. It's on Ministry of Testing, and Alan talks about it with Brent on a regular basis. If you go to angryweasel.com /AB testing, they do a podcast. They actually focused quite a bit on these testing principles in their podcast, and you can check that out. They have those earmarked, so you can go back and listen to them. But yeah, I totally recommend listening to the podcast, and that could also help you to pick up more information or more ideas about how to apply these principles. So let's dive into the first one. So this is the first principle of the modern testing principle. So our priority is improving the business. I think we talk about that a lot as people that work for a business, but we talk about the customer, but then we focus a lot on the customer as testers. But this is actually shifting a little bit to understanding the whole system, right? So you're working for a business. It's not necessarily delivering value to the customers. It's delivering what they need. It's understanding the customer, but understanding what you're trying to sell to them as well. So it's both sides of that coin, right? When I am a business trying to develop or make something, and I'm trying to find customers, how I do that even is part of quality. How I approach a customer, how I build the product, that's all quality. How I see that as understanding their value proposition, what they get out of my product is about quality. So this first principle is really about understanding the business and then understanding the customer in the business is part of that. So there's 3 parts. I broke this kind of down into 3 main tasks that can help achieve this principle. So one of them is building feedback loops. Another one is adaptation for survival, and iteration. So is the key to the first 2. So we're going to go through that here and understand that a little bit better. So you can see this right here. One of the core principles around this is visibility. To understand a business and understand how to deliver what your customers need, you have to create visibility. We talk a lot about silos and breaking silos, and one of the main ways you can do that is by creating visibility between your teams and your team members, and even your management and into your individual contributors. So we're going to talk about feedback and iterations and adaptation. So building a feedback loop. So feedbacks are really important. Not only am I talking about retros, because retros are a part of an agile process, but we're also talking about getting feedback from customers. This could be anything from gathering analytics to having them fill out surveys. This could be talking to stakeholders, that kind of feedback. It could be having other teams feedback on just what you do in a sprint or you're preparing to release, or any small bit of feedback is what you're looking for here, from various different directions. So if you have a channel for feedback from your customer, and you have channel from feedback from your stakeholders, and you have channel feedback from other team members or other senior developers or other senior testers or junior testers or junior developers, all of that's really important to have. You want to take all of that feedback and then boil it down to the things that are obvious, like things that can be solved fairly quickly, and things that are long term that you need to make a roadmap to solve. So getting that feedback is really important. A lot of people do this in different ways. One, I can't emphasize enough about having analytics as the core way to get feedback without necessarily, having to poll everybody or survey everybody every couple of days. Surveys are important, but I think analytics and uses and understanding the analytics of how your software is being used is as a core part of that feedback and visibility, because that does create visibility. The thing that I think people are worried about is analytics within terms of the law and understanding how much you can actually obtain from a customer. And different fields, different domains require different things. If you're working in the medical field in the United States, for instance, we cannot collect certain personal information. I think that's pretty standard in the world right now. There's even parts of the world, like in Europe and even in California, parts of the United States, where collecting information via email is now under a lot of scrutiny. So those are the things that we look at, but keep that in mind, and you want to stay within those limits when you're gathering feedback. But at the same time, you want to gather that feedback. You don't want to be so afraid of those specifications or laws. You want to stay within that law. But gathering feedback is really important. Even the kinds and different kinds of it. So okay. So the next we're going to talk about is adapting, and this is all for the understanding the business, that first principle. So it's not just a biology term. If you're not taking in the feedback and then figuring out how to adapt to it and understand how the business is changing or how you can adapt to your customers changing, this is a really good example right now of how we as an entire planet have adapted to a crisis. I see this in my day-to-day, not interacting with folks, but when I do go out, I notice people are maintaining a distance. I notice people are wearing masks. I notice people are wearing gloves. People have adapted because it's a requirement, and businesses have adapted. So when you have a restaurant that has tried to sell food to a certain extent and they can't bring anybody in, now I see restaurants that I can call in an order, I can pick up the order at the curb, or stop by and pick it up. I don't even have to go into the building, and they're handing it to me wearing a mask and gloves. So that's all adaptation because of feedback, because of analytics, because of understanding what customers need and what the government's requiring. Like those things can all be labeled as feedback. So the problem is that if you get that feedback or you don't have enough feedback, you can create a bottleneck to adaptation. That's the opposite of adapting. Like, what if we didn't institute lockdown procedures to help maintain or control what's going on right now? Would we have more problems? Certainly. But we are seeing problems with the economy because of the lockdown, but we're also seeing adaptations to manage those problems because of the information that we're gathering about the economic struggles for different countries, and understanding and trying to do different things. So adaptation and experimenting and understanding feedback and trying to manage what the information you're getting is really important. And that all feeds back into visibility. So feedback has to be visible, your adaptation, your experiments have to be visible, and then getting feedback on those experiments to allow you to adapt and to decide whether it was successful or it was a failure, and then to analyze the failure, getting feedback, and then adapt again and try a new experiment. So that's all in the business. If it sounds agile, it's because it is. It has all these principles are very agile. So let's talk about iteration. And we talked about that a little bit with adapting, right? And the feedback loops. But iteration is very dependent on getting the feedback and understanding adaptation. So it's not only about Scrum and Agile and sprints and how you put the software together. It's how to understand and how to respond quickly and how to move quickly. So if you have developed processes and software in a stable, high functioning way with your team, you're going to develop test procedures and monitoring and observability that'll allow you to iterate faster and fix issues quicker, or even deliver features faster to market. One of the things that holds back iteration and even adaptation is technical debt. A technical debt and lack of visibility. You have those things when people, have a backlog of bugs that are separate from the backlog of stories. You have hidden technical debt that people aren't concerned about. So they're not bubbling it up and it's not visible. So therefore you can't iterate, you can't adapt. So even doing something as small as taking the bugs out of the backlog and putting those bugs in a more visible place, or making sure you go through those bugs and triage them down, or making sure that you start iterating on your technical debt on a regular basis and taking part of your sprint or part of whatever life cycle process you have around your software and pulling in 20% of your technical debt and dealing with it and making it visible and adapting to that information. It gives you more opportunities to iterate faster. So all of this is not easy. It's different for every company and every software project. Sometimes it's even different for every team. But the point is to try to identify it and identify your needs in these different sections, and then practice it, right? And then adapt, and then learn, and then keep going and bring in more feedback and understand. So that's where I think that first principle lies, right? So we'll just go back to that principle really quick. Priority is improving the business. So if you use all of those things, you're going to improve the business. Visibility, adaptation, feedback, iteration. They all feed into each other. They all feed into helping. And the core being of helping improve the business is that visibility. Okay. Principle 2, we accelerate the team and use models like lane thinking and theory of constraints to help identify and prioritize and mitigate bottlenecks from the system. So we were just talking about bottlenecks a little bit earlier, how sometimes not getting enough feedback can be a bottleneck to adaptation or coming up with experiments to adapt. And sometimes not having a way to experiment can be also a bottleneck for iteration and adaptation. So this second principle is sort of a foundation to that, to try to help you identify those pieces and get those roadblocks out of the way so you can actually improve the business. So let's talk about 2 ways of doing that. And Alan and Brent go into these pretty extensively on the podcast, and I'm just going to touch on them a little bit. If you're not familiar with them, that's okay. These, people spend whole lives studying these 2 different things, so it's not like you have to know everything about them, but even knowing a little bit about them does help. So theory of constraints. Every process has a constraint or a bottleneck, right? A lot of times testing gets pointed out as the bottleneck. Trying to get past that bottleneck is the important part. So the best way of dealing with any constraints you find is trying to tackle the biggest, toughest one head on. If you take the small one and do it first, that might give you an early win, but it's not, and a fast win, but it might be treating a symptom rather than looking at the root cause. So if you see a really big constraint, whatever it is, you start breaking it down and start working on it. And this could be anything from, how the team does software. It could be a cultural problem with the company and how they view quality. It could be something as simple as needing more automation or building out a framework and understanding how that might improve the team's efforts towards delivering a quality piece of software. So one of the things that I found really interesting is just by an example, a VP that was really proud of the number of tests we were running. And we were running thousands and thousands of tests a week and, up to almost 500,000 a month. And it was like, why are we running that many tests? Why are we doing that? Are we actually reducing the number of defects we're bringing in? No, the reduction of defects wasn't happening. Critical defects were still coming up even in late release cycles. So we had thousands and thousands of tests running. So what's the real what's the thing there? Why do I see that as a constraint? I see it as a constraint in the fact that we have all this automation, but we really aren't using it effectively. And we're getting false positives. We're feeling good about the number of things we're running, but it's really not telling us anything about the system if we're constantly finding failures still. So that's a constraint. Like, how do we make that better? Are we testing the right thing? So you can take that idea. There's constraints, bottlenecks could be anywhere. And that's not even necessarily like if we're running all of these tests and teams are running all of these tests, but they're not getting the right information. That's where automation fails. You've done a lot of work to automate something, and it's no longer valuable because you've automated in a way that it no longer gives you beneficial information. So you have to look at all the different things. So even a positive, or even something that looks like a positive, could be a constraint. Systems thinking. So I have some links in the slides that we'll share later that go into this a little bit more. But system thinking is really a holistic approach. So it actually pairs very nicely with our first principle, thinking about all of the iteration, adaptation, feedback, and visibility. And if you're thinking about a system and how and as a business or even as a domain and how that works and how customers work in that system and how you work in that system as an employee or a contractor or some management level, any of that, you're actually thinking about how that system works. And then you want to try to figure out how you could tweak parts of that system over time and change the context of pieces of that system to make it work better. So that's the whole point. You're trying to accelerate how your business and things are doing. You want to ship really awesome software. So thinking about how you ship that out the door, whose hands, because it's oftentimes we build things when we realize that when the team builds it and ships it, that's usually not the last thing that happens. It goes to a staging process. It gets tested again, or it goes out into the world. And then, like, how do people know that the software is out there? Well, you have to have marketing market it, and you have to have your consultants or your salespeople talk to people about it. So it's thinking about things beyond the team that build the software and understanding how that works with those teams can actually help your team build better software. So there's a example that Alan likes to point out a lot about how Yahoo went through, Yahoo.com went through and fired all of their testers because they found a constraint in testing and they brutally removed it, right? They've been trying to recover ever since. The problem is that even though that was a constraint, even though that was a bottleneck, they did not take any feedback. They didn't figure out how to adapt or shift expectations or grow the culture or iterate on how to make things better or shift that culture or shift things to other people to be able to adapt to having that bottleneck removed. One of the things that Alan, it's also from Alan, likes to say oftentimes, when you have, when you find a bottleneck, it's often a problem that it's been stopgapped, and you have to discover whether it's a Band-Aid, and you remove the Band-Aid and you have a little bit of blood, but it's okay, and it'll dry up, it'll clot, or you remove that bottleneck and you had a tourniquet, and suddenly you have like a gusher and everything's sort of bleeding everywhere and it's nasty. So trying to discover which that is and figure out like how fast you can make sure. So if it is a tourniquet, it's like, okay, we know we can't take this off immediately, but we can slowly over time, shift things and move things and create a culture of quality where it will engender more folks to take on and write better tests and write more automation and fill in the gaps and actually take the people that were in those roles and help them skill up and move them to different places and have them use their knowledge to help the system rather than, fire everybody. So that's a really great example. So, and then a correction of this, like one of the things that I like to point out is from Donovan Brown. He's from the Microsoft Azure team. They actually took 3 years used to take 3 years to put out their software. So this is a better version of what Yahoo did. And Donovan actually gives a talk about this, and it's an amazing talk, and I have the link in the slides for you. He talks about how it used to take them 3 years to deploy Azure. So they slowly started changing things so that when the teams inside Microsoft were asking for cloud infrastructure, they were forced to use Azure. When the teams themselves started using it and realizing how bad some of the defects were, they felt the pain. So then they started fixing the problems because they felt their customers' pain for once. Then they started shifting to monitoring and gathering information and analytics and feedback and iteration. And over time, they've gotten to the point where they're down to a very small team, about 10 or 12 people, I think, the last I heard. They have early warning systems everywhere about networks and infrastructure and all kinds of things. They don't have any testers on their team, or classically, people in a testing role. Everybody tests. But they didn't fire those people either. They either skilled them up or moved them to other teams that needed skilled like SDETs or testers. And then, they work on iterations. Now they have that software to the point that they can deliver it in less than 3 weeks. A brand new up and running version of Azure can be, from start to finish delivered in 3 weeks, not 3 years. Iterations are delivered quickly, like overnight. They have fixes within 15 minutes. And that's from some of their folks being on Twitter and monitoring Twitter. Somebody will tweet to them and they'll like, oh, let us check it out. And they'll have a resolution within 15 minutes sometimes. To me, that's the high functioning team that we should all be striving for. Some of us, it's going to be harder to get there and it's going to be longer to get there than others. But I think we as a group and we as an industry, and those of us that are very invested in understanding how testing can actually benefit the system and the business and the overall culture of a company, not just on a team, not just functionally, not just writing automation, but really thinking holistically. That's what systems thinking will give us. And that's how we get to that whole part of the second principle, is understanding that and helping remove bottlenecks. So we're on the third principle here, and being a force for continuous improvement. So we've heard a lot about how to help the business, optimize the business. We've talked about bottlenecks. And then this is what I was just talking about a minute ago, understanding how to adapt, optimize, and succeed, how to bring that culture forward. So it's not just a few people that understand how to test, but everybody on the team understands. And everybody on the team understands how they can make it better, or how they can build out frameworks or research things to make it better. So I like to call this a critical, be visible to be valuable, and then also critical thinking. So it's a little bit harder to be visible right now because we're all at home, but we have a bunch of tools that help us do that. Everything from Slack to email to Zoom to the platform we're using right now. That helps a ton with visibility. So visibility is valuable. So tribal knowledge, and not only just being visible in front of somebody or having one-on-ones or having feedback of that nature, it's also understanding and not siloing people to a particular piece of work. You want people to be more paint dripped than maybe T-shaped, but not so deep in that T that like they look at it and they're like, that is all they can do. And maybe they can do some other stuff, but really, if you take them out of their comfort zone, they wouldn't be able to adapt and do anything else. When people work in silos, it's really hard to stay at a company for very long, or you stay at a company and you're there and you're working on that same thing forever and ever. And that stinks. Like, you would hope that a career would let you venture out and try new things and experiment on new things. And the point of that is like, you have to teach other people how you do your job so that you can actually experiment with other things or gain time to experiment. So when you make your job visible and show how easy it is and show, hey, this is what I'm doing, we can share this with the whole team. We can do a rotation, whether that's answering customer, forums, or writing automation, or, doing a test matrix, if you're the only person that's responsible for that, if you're the only person that is doing that for your team, you're creating a silo around yourself and a lack of visibility into what you're doing. So my first mission for you is to take that and make it visible. Say, hey, team, this is what I do with testing on a regular basis. Who would like to help me? And I bet you would have some takers. There would be people that would be interested in how you're testing. So, and that is also, sharing what you know, and removing that tribal knowledge problem. So let's talk about critical thinking. So visibility is valuable. Okay. But sometimes companies don't really understand what testing what testing is. They just know they need it, and they don't understand what testers do. Of folks that are sort of sacrificed on the speed to market, a lot of testing that's sort of sacrificed because we got to get it out there fast and we have to understand it. But then, once it's out there, people are like, oh, well, this isn't high quality. This isn't ready for prime time. Because they didn't understand the value of testing and understanding how things work. So when we talk about critical thinking and talk about how to make ourselves visible, we also give people the option to actually understand what we're doing and how it applies to making a quality product around this. So I like to call it thinking fast and slow, because there's a great book on that as well. And when we make things visible, we demo things, we show how we do our process, we even pair developers pairing with each other, any kind of work like that, we're making it visible. When we, even DevOps, when we're making how the software gets made visible to everybody, not just the DevOps team or the ops team or whoever's deploying the software. We're exposing that knowledge, that critical knowledge, to everyone, and we're also acknowledging that we don't want to have silos and that we want to make it visible, and we want to understand the visible constraints in the system and understand how to remove them and understand any failures in the system as well. So this all leads back into critical thinking, because when we address those failures up front, we can understand them and break them down and do a root cause analysis and maybe get to the point where we can do better the next time. It's like, is this going to happen again? Did we learn from this? What could we do better? What could we implement that would let us not have this same failure, right? So that's where all those critical thinking and making things visible. Like, there's a lot to be said for businesses that do that on a regular basis. They're more successful. When they've had problems, they made them visible. They made how they've solved them visible. They even made how they will mitigate those problems next time visible, because it is all about how to not only communicate to the customer and making that visible, but making sure that trust is built up and it's not lost, and especially when something fails. So a lot of high functioning teams are built on trust. And if you're not making things visible, if you're siloing things, if you're keeping pieces of critical functionality to yourself because you're the only one that knows how to do it, then you're not only making life harder for you, you're making life harder for your team. And that's not good. Nobody likes to live like that. So I would just challenge you to share what you know, and understand and try to learn from other people. I like to use this when I do career coaching. I encourage people to shadow people all the time. Like, if you don't understand something, go shadow them, or go be somebody's intern for a week and figure out how that works, and then bring that information back, because that's how a lot of times you can apply those things to what you're working on with the different teams. So anyway, so instead of telling somebody, if somebody comes up with a brilliant idea on your team, especially if you're a manager or if you're a senior person, try not to tell them no. Try to figure out how they can experiment safely or understand what that is, but and understand what the goals of success are. Even if it's like, hey, I want to write this in a completely different language. Is that the smartest thing to do? If we're in, this language, what is that going to optimize for us? Instead of thinking, charging off into a direction and we're going to rewrite everything in a particular language or framework. Like I remember one time working on a software that was written in Angular, and they wanted to upgrade everything to React. It's like, okay, what are we going to gain from that other than we're working in a different framework? Well, we're going to gain maintenance capabilities. We're going to gain smoothness of being able to transition pieces out. The modularness of that framework is going to help us with data management and memory management. It's like, okay, then we understand what we're doing, and why we're putting the people in this process to refactor things. So, and a lot of times people do have that conversation. I think the problem is that we don't make that conversation as visible as we need to. So critical thinking, understanding, and allowing people to experiment, iterate, and then getting feedback, and then adapting. So it all ties together. All right. So we're going to talk about number 4 of the principles. We care deeply about quality culture of our team. We coach, lead, and nurture. So this is where we come in as testers, right? So maybe we're not doing the functional testing from day to day. Maybe we're not doing checks. Maybe we're not writing the automation all the time. But we do have that knowledge. We've learned a lot from our positions and how we've interacted with teams. We understand quality aspects, but we can't keep that to ourselves. We can't be the gatekeepers of that. So we want to get that into the team and the team we work with, and build trust in our team and understand how we can nurture that and lead them into a mature quality culture of quality. So creating a community of quality. So definitely it's a whole organization thing. It's not just the development team. So when you're talking about a community quality, it's not just for testers. Funny enough, we like to be like, hey, we're the quality culture, or the quality community, or the testing community, but it's not just us. Like, quality doesn't have to begin or end with just testing. It could be marketing, it could be management, it could be how you bring in your interns and train them. It could be any of that. So that's the beauty of this kind of stuff. Internal, external, how you engage with the public, whether it's formal, informal. So any kinds of those activities, they don't have to be totally about work. I consider me coming and giving this webinar part of my community of quality. I want to share these principles. I want to share the understanding I have about them. And then I want, even if I'm learning and adapting and changing this talk over time, it's because I've talked with you all out there and we've had discussions, and it's like, oh, that's a great idea. I should change that, or I should adapt that, or I should talk about this particular situation and make it visible to the community, and thereby spreading that quality, or spreading those lessons, and encouraging other people to take that lesson and learn from it and adapt. So that's all of that's in here. And as long as we have those communities and we keep being inclusive and include the developers and include the ops people and include the marketing folks and include our technical writers and management, then we're going to keep the ball rolling on how that we can bring up that community of quality inside of a company and outside of a company, and hopefully for the betterment of everybody, right? So I like to point out some communities that aren't just for testers, even though they have testing in their name, right? So Ministry of Testing is one of them. And some of you have heard about that. And then Test Automation University is definitely another one. Testing UE is another one. And when we talk about these are communities built for testers, by testers, but they also don't just have to be for only testers. They could be for everybody. And when you bring your PM and you bring your dev developer to a talk like this, or to a conference or whatever, that they see that too, and they understand, oh, I there's this whole other side of the coin that I haven't really talked about. When I go talk at a dev conference, I bring all of this information to a developer conference, and I engage with the developers as much as I do the testers, because it's important. We're trying to build that community of quality. And it could be everything from hiring the right candidates, finding people that care about your software to give you feedback. All of that is a part of this. So when we talk about culture of quality, right? So the whole team's involved at minimum, if not the whole company. You want to, for at the team level, you definitely want to involve pairing, but I think pairing can happen anywhere. I pair with my technical writer. I pair with my manager when we have one-on-ones and we talk about problems and we talk about things to come up with. I pair with people that are not even in my org in Unity. I'll talk with folks that I have no responsibility to because they're willing to help me understand problems that they're facing, and then maybe I can take those similar issues and see comparative things and use their solutions with problems I'm having. Mentoring. I mentor a lot of people in the company, career-wise, and even like whether it's on testing career or it's a career period. It's not just I'm not just mentoring people in the testing role. I'm mentoring a technical writer. I'm mentoring a couple of devs. Open that up. Leadership doesn't mean that you have to stick in, be in one road. Try to find ways to help people where they're at and understand what their challenges are, and then hopefully help them figure out opportunities. And working towards that mature quality mindset is huge, because I think when people understand that they can share the pressures and needs of what they're doing, even in small companies, even in startups, I think you can do this. You're building software, you're trying to hit a deadline, understanding that it can't be this really hard fast march, that certain things are going to be more complicated, and reassessing those things and understanding and having trust in the team to be able to share that workload and share it in such a way that you can get it done faster. All of that is important, especially at the team level, but not just at the team level. When companies grow and get bigger, you want to make sure that culture of quality is being grown through the company as well. And it goes back to, hey, you want your marketing department to be just as good as your development department. So, and that's also looking at your system too and your business. So even if you're a tester, you probably didn't realize you had all that pressure on you. That's okay. You're not alone. That's why you get people to help you, and that's why you share it with them, and then you understand how you can grow the whole company in this direction. And don't do this by yourself. This isn't a mission for you to go on. This is a mission for everybody to go on with you. So you want to really do that whole team development and experiment, and then hopefully that broadcasts out to the rest of the company because people see your success and how you're doing things. So this is the quality culture transition guide. This is one of the things that Alan and Brent developed, and Alan's pretty adamant that this isn't a maturity model, and it's not really. It's definitely a guide to make you aware of where your team's at and how you could get to a more mature team model. I have links to this, so don't worry if you don't get this all in one go. We'll make sure you get the links. But the idea is that you assess where your team is at, and then understand and take a couple of things that are blockers or impediments to moving to the next part, and see if you can solve them and iterate on them and come up with experiments and ways to do that. So this is a pretty cool cultural guide. And this takes time, and sometimes you can leapfrog, but probably not. Like, you have to go through each one of these and sort of figure out. The one I like to point out is like technical debt and maintenance. And I know a lot of people have like these huge backlogs. What if you just deleted that all tomorrow? What if that was gone? What would happen? Who would melt down? Somebody would melt down, because that would probably happen. But if you deleted that all tomorrow, what would really happen? Probably nothing. You just start over again. I actually did that with a company. We deleted our entire backlog, 3,000 defects. Nobody had really touched them in about 3 or 4 months. And the manager came in and was like, "Are we using any of these?" And nobody could say yes or no. And so she just deleted the whole database. Isn't that wild? That's crazy, right? You deleted the whole database? Guess what? None of those bugs ever came back. None of them. It was all bad data or old data or data that wasn't being used. So then we started with a medium-sized backlog, and we went forward, and then we reduced that backlog, and then we went forward, and then we got to a place where we were interacting with the developers and talking about defects as they were happening, as we were finding them, as automation was running. That's an amazing place to be in. That's huge. And a lot of people, it takes time. Did that happen overnight? No, that was almost a year's worth of work, but you had to be bold first to do it, right? You have to take that step and go, what happens if I do this? And in reality, she probably saved off that database somewhere and had it, but she didn't tell any of us that. She just told us she got rid of it. So it's kind of cool when you have people that'll do that. And I know that probably sounds really radical, but sometimes you have to do experiments like that and see what happens. And it's, if it really went south, then she probably could have brought it back up and it would have been fine. But that's the whole point. And some of these goals might not fit. Like maybe you can never get to completely optimize. Like maybe your high functioning team isn't always going to be, continuous deployment or completely team owned, like, because you'll have different things coming in and out of the team. That's okay. Nobody is requiring that. That's like the high watermark, right? But if you can get some movement on this guide to improve even small things, that's where you want to be. That's where you want to go with that. Ways you can do that. You can go through this model. This is a really cool model that Alan talks about, and it's out there. There's more information out there, and I have some links in the slides. So awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, reinforcement. So you keep going through that cycle, and then eventually, it gets to reinforcement. So, like, you don't have to use this mindset model, but it allows you to develop things in incremental steps. So awareness could be discovering a bottleneck. What's the desire? Remove the bottleneck. How do we remove it? So that's the knowledge gathering part. How do we know we have to have this ability or this automation or this framework in place to be able to do that. So then you develop the ability and then you reinforce it. It's like, oh, look what we did. This was really good. How was it successful? How can we take what we did here and move it to another team and have them be successful as well? So all of that is that particular model. And it's really great. I've seen this work in other places, and it's just taking things in incremental steps and little baby steps and making it visible and taking that feedback and adapting and iterating on it. So the other thing you want to do, because some of this doesn't work by you alone. I've already talked about that. This is a team thing. It's a business thing. It's a whole person, whole team effort. But you have to have leaders. You have to have people willing to delete the database. Okay? You have to grow your leaders. You have to mentor leaders. You have to trust in leaders. You have to build trust. You have to learn delegation skills. You have to empower your teammates to lead. One of the things I have learned in management is servant leadership. It is important. I want to understand how people are affected day to day and what they can do and what I need to help them achieve, whether that's career goals or just their day-to-day, work. What can I do to help you get to where you need and understand what you need? So that's important. All of that's important. And having a way to grow leaders in your company is super important to being able to grow mature teams and understand the maturity model and experiment and adapt and make things visible. So one of the quotes Alan likes to bring up here is actually from Marty Linsky, and it's leadership is disappointing people at a rate they can absorb. Alan likes to change it up a little bit and call it leadership is disappointing people at a rate they can tolerate, because oftentimes change is hard. And if you push people through change at a rate they can't tolerate, they're often just going to abandon it. And you don't want that, especially if somebody's really good and they've worked a really long time to get where they're at, and you push them too hard, then they're not going to want to understand or adapt or make things visible, even their own pain. They won't make it visible, right? So trying to celebrate the successes with the failures. Celebrate the failures, even the small failures. Make them visible. Have teams understand it. It's like, oh, hey, we had a group of devs working on a feature offsite. There was another dev when they had been working on this feature for 3 days. and they hit a blocker, they hit a roadblock, and they hadn't talked about it with anybody. By the third day, they actually mentioned what they were doing, and another senior developer, oh, yeah, we tried that a couple of years ago. The reason why that's not working is because of this, and it's never been changed. And so that whole team had put in 3 days worth of work on an offsite, and they realized they couldn't get any further. And if they had said something to somebody before they had started about what they were going to try to do, they would have realized that they wouldn't have spent 3 days working on something. So that failure is important. Like that, I'm not saying that the team failed to share or the leader failed to share, but like that was an important failure that nobody knew about until it was like 3 days in. Like, thankfully, it wasn't the whole weekend, but, like the whole week of offsite. But, just think if they hadn't shared it till the last day, they would have wasted a whole week working on something that never would have worked. So failures are really important to share. All right. So number 5, I'm need to go a little bit faster here. So we believe that the customer is the only one capable to judge and evaluate the product. This is just, yes, and we the customer is part of the business, right? So we're trying to optimize the business. We want to understand the customer. So what's the problems being solved? We're going to try to make data-driven decisions based on feedback, analytics, things that we bring in from the customer. And we're going to do data-driven development. This is part of the maturity. This is a higher mature development team where we're understanding, or any team, like marketing team, sales team, whatever. We're looking at the data from the customer, how they're using the product. We're going to let them tell us how they're evaluating the product. And we're going to get feedback from them. If they think it's crap, then it's crap. No matter how much time and effort and how many bugs we fix, if they're convinced that it's crap, we're not going to get out of that hole very quickly. So, problem solving is not the same as problem discovering. That's important. So what are the biggest problems your customers face? So prioritize those problems over your defects. If you fix 500 defects versus, one customer problem, the customers aren't going to care if you fix 500 defects. What they're going to care is that you fixed their problem, right? So understanding that is important. Letting customers lead the way. Having those decisions for development driven by your customers and driven by the feedback that they create, and lets you discover the constraints in the system. Testing and testers are not representative of the customer. I know that's scandalous to say, because traditionally testing has represented the customer. What we represent is a way to mitigate, find risk, and mitigate problems. What that tester role represents. Customers need to find ways to get that feedback from them and let them advocate for themselves and take that data back and apply that to how we test. But we're not necessarily in that tester. The tester role is not necessarily the customer. Now, we should ground our testing in the data that the customers give us. So in that way, we can mimic the customer, but we're not necessarily doing, as the customer. We shouldn't pretend to be the customer. We should be driven. Things that we're doing should be driven by the customer and the information and feedback. We should develop and adapt based on that. And then we should iterate, right? So it all goes back to that first principle too. Okay. So principle number 6, use data extensively. So this 5 and 6 are kind of comparative, right? We're going to understand the customer usage. We're going to understand the gaps. We're going to develop product hypotheses and business impact based on that data. And that's really important. That also leads into testing. We definitely want to use this in testing. Like if you're not approaching your testing and you're doing a shotgun approach and you're not using exploratory testing or risk-based analysis testing or kind of understanding how to mitigate risks, like, do you need to test everything every release? Well, I don't know. If you have a bunch of automation running, does all the automation need to run every release? Could we get to release faster if we ran targeted automation and developed a process by which we only tested the high-risk pieces that changed in that cycle? So all of that can be led by data. right? And getting that data to come back from the customer and analytics and understanding where those risk points are. What are the high usage parts of our system? What are the absolutely must not fail, has to be up 99.999999% of the time, right? So that's what we're going to focus on and do with number 6 here. Coming back to defects. The problems are made up and the points don't matter, because it's true. Everyone loses with defects. Back to understanding the data collected. So this is a great way to collect a bunch of data about how customers are using things. But what if we considered that data points? What if it didn't matter if we fixed it? What if we considered that actual data and understanding what customers are doing? Maybe it's an education problem. I've run into this at Unity, actually. We got 5 or 6 defects on a particular area. There was nothing wrong. It was a user error. But truly, it was a user error. What that pointed to was not a defect in the software. It pointed to a deficiency in our technical materials. So my move was to actually make a ticket to have technical documentation updated with the correct information and correct advice and correct usage for that particular API of our software. We can't sit there and be like, oh, well, the customer doesn't understand. Well, why doesn't the customer understand? Is it because we have failed to educate them? Probably. Or is it because there's a lack of things to educate them? That's also a gap. So that's also a constraint and a gap. And at that point, you take it, and try to figure out. And another way you can get data out of defects, if you have aggregate areas that have big problems or constant problems, or you see a defect, an area that's broken a lot, how do you mitigate that? Well, you take that and see that as a risk and do some root cause analysis and really dig in, because the defects are a symptom. So if you stopped and didn't fix every single one of those defects, but actually fixed the problem behind the defects, what's the problem? Oh, well, that's really old code. It needs to be refactored. It's not very testable. So maybe the solution isn't fixing the 15 or 20 defects that are related to that old code. It's actually refactoring that code so it's testable and more stable. So that's where, we can really make a difference on some of these. All right, last principle, and I might just run a few minutes over, and I apologize for that. So we expand testing abilities and know-how across the team. So this goes back to everything I've been saying this whole time. This means you may actually reduce or eliminate the need for a dedicated testing specialist. As I explained when I started, I'm on a team that I'm developing right now, that I'm experimenting with, where I am not directly doing testing on a team on a day-to-day basis, but I am helping that team discover ways to do testing. I have several teams, actually. Some of them are more along the maturity process than others. Some of them are wholeheartedly jumping in and just we own all the testing, we own all the automation, we understand what we're doing. The testers working on performance testing and getting that up to speed for the group. But that having that model and understanding how you can take that weight, remove that bottleneck, be the person that actually leads and teaches people on your team how to share those testing responsibilities is amazing. It's freeing in a way, and it's also frees you up to learn other things. Maybe you've wanted to learn about analytics. Maybe you've wanted to understand how to code. Maybe you've wanted to pair with developers more and shift into more of a development role. You can't do that if you're stuck in testing. You can't do that if the team won't take on those testing responsibilities with you. So really, this is part of the maturity model of a team, and understanding that the team owns quality from the very beginning, from the inception of any idea. And they have to own how to test it, and they have to own how they mitigate problems. And you can help them because you know how to do that. You've learned, you've developed a professional way of getting everything together. So just be visible. Make it something the team owns, something the business owns, instead of just you, right? Or your testing group. That's the important part. All right. So don't panic. Organize, right? Be the leader. You are in a leadership role testing, yeah, and you may not feel like you're that, but you are. You can even lead from an individual contributor role and say, hey, what if we tried this? What if we did these experiments? How would we, how could we move forward? What are some of these ideas we can do? So this is the end, probably right here. It is by about a minute over, but I'm going to tell you, it's still a good thing. We can ask, I don't know if we have time for questions. If you want to ask questions, we can, or I can answer questions later via whatever other method or.
Yeah, of course. Thank you very much. First of all, it was great. You were really enthusiastic with a lot of insights. So thank you very much, first of all. We have one question from Edgardo. Let me share the question here. So can you see the question there?
Yeah. So Eduardo, it's not a generic question. Actually, I like this question. So analytics. If you want someplace to start, Google Analytics is really good with this, especially for web applications. That's a really specific, but I find any kind of analytics is really helpful. So it depends on what you're doing. That's the other problem. Like I work with teams that work with packages inside of Unity, so we gather analytics through various hooks and means that way. I also work with teams that are doing content delivery. So we're delivering content and people are downloading. So it's very much like a AWS container, but it's specialized for assets for gaming and stuff like that. So that analytics, how I would change that is like, instead of looking at page views, I would be looking at upload and download times and how large of an upload and how long it would take and how fast we could get something up into the cloud and then have them bring it back down wherever they're at, and how, if we can download 5 gigs in less than 30 seconds, and depending on what the average speed of their internet is, like, and we understand that, and then we can improve and help them improve on that. So I think it depends on what you're working on, but any kind of analytics or any kind of metrics that measure and give you feedback. So you have to come up with the measurements, and then you have to figure out how to measure them, and then that's the analytics you want to collect. And it could be wrong. Like if you start somewhere and you're discovering you're not getting the information that you want, that's when you can iterate on it, right? So you get feedback that, oh, that's wrong. We're not understanding that information, or we're not getting exactly what we thought we were. So let's adjust that. How do we adjust it and get the right information? So and that all still fits into getting that feedback and then adapting to it and then iterating on it, right? So hopefully that answered the question.
For sure it is.
Okay.
Thank you very much. So time flies, so we reached the end of the time.
Yeah.
So if you have any other questions, Melissa has shared her contact information, so you can contact her directly or by email or Twitter. Mm-hmm. So thanks again, Melissa, and everyone for joining us today. Please remember that we will upload the webinar on our YouTube channel, as well as the presentation material on our SlideShare account. And we invite you all we invite you all to follow us in our social media to get the notifications when they're available. And well, thank you again, Melissa, and everyone for joining us today. It has been a pleasure. And so just to end up, next webinar will be May 12th. And we will have a speaker, the Agile testing expert and well-known Janet Gregory. So we hope you can join us too. So thanks again, everyone. See you soon and keep safe. Thank you very much. Buenas noches y buena semana para todos. Chau, chau. Thank you very much.
Ciao.
Thanks, Melissa.
You're welcome. Bye.